Her 14-year-old son drowned in the mine. The water came during the night, and the boy didn't have time to escape. For 2 years, this woman has been fighting a losing battle against the water that takes everything. And a stranger who fell from the sky says he'll drain the cursed pit in 40 days. Cold, wet earth against his cheek. The smell of peat and manure hits his nose so sharply that Ethan Cross opens his eyes before he has time to think. Gray sky, black stones. A woman in a woolen shawl stands over him and looks as if he's a corpse that dared to stir. Behind her shoulder is a wooden wagon. The wheels are wooden. The rims are iron, nailed on. Not bolts, not rivets. Nails. Ethan sits up. His head is buzzing like after a blow. The last thing he remembers? The headlights of a freight train and a whistle. A whistle like that of a 280 steam locomotive. He looks at his hands. The same calluses from the hammer. The same burn from a splash of molten copper. He reaches into his pocket. A pocket knife, a pencil, a lighter. No phone, no wallet, no ID. The woman makes the sign of the cross with 2 fingers pressed together and says he fell from the sky, that she saw a flash above the mine and pulled him out of the mud, that he needs to get up now. There are wolves here at night, and this is where the strangeness begins. She speaks in a foreign language, and he understands every word. The meaning enters his head as if someone had inserted a translator directly into his brain. Ethan stands up. His legs hold him. He looks around and starts counting, an engineer's habit. The shaft's incline is 18 degrees. The manual gate is for 4 people. The posts are hewn with an axe, not a saw, not a single cable. Hemp ropes. He's standing in the middle of the 18th century, maybe earlier. The woman's name is Margaret Holloway. 34 years old, but she looks 45. She leads him down to the town and speaks sparingly. The place is called Greystone, the 3rd year of drought. The rivers have run dry. The wheels have stopped. The mines are flooded. The Baron is dead. The silver lies underwater, and there's no way to get it. Half the town is left. The other half is waiting for spring to leave as well. Greystone is dying. Ethan listens and says nothing, but something new clicks in his mind. He looks at the mine shaft and sees not rock. He sees a blueprint. 3 projections: top view, side view, cross-section. Depth, 40 feet. Cross-section, 6 by 6. Water volume, 12,000 gallons. Inflow, half a gallon per minute. He'd never been able to do this before. Not in his head. Not without paper. Not in a second. Something clicked the moment he died at the railroad crossing and woke up here. 15 years of working with steam engines have sorted themselves into neat compartments in his mind, and every blueprint comes to him instantly. Margaret leads him into the house. Stone walls, earthen floor, a hearth that smokes until it brings tears to your eyes. She sets down a bowl of gray, warm slop. Ethan devours it without asking what it is, hungry as a wolf. Margaret sits down across from him and asks who he is. Ethan thinks for 3 seconds. He says he's a master, that he builds machines. Margaret doesn't bat an eye. She says a master without tools is just another mouth to feed. Fair enough. He asks if he can go down to the mine tomorrow. Why? I want to look at the water. Margaret is silent. Then she lets it slip. Her son drowned in that mine 2 years ago. The water came at night. The boy didn't make it out. He was 14. Ethan puts down his spoon. He looks at the woman who said this in the same tone she'd used to talk about the weather. Flat, dry. That's how someone speaks who has cried it all out and can't cry anymore. He says he's sorry. Margaret doesn't answer. She stands up and spreads straw for him. Ethan lies down and closes his eyes. And beneath his eyelids, A diagram spins. Newcomen's atmospheric engine, the simplest one, the roughest, the most forgiving of errors. Cylinder, piston, connecting rod, boiler. Steam condenses in the cylinder and creates a vacuum. Atmospheric pressure pushes the piston down. The connecting rod lifts the pump rod. Water flows upward. He sees the entire machine, every tolerance, every bolt. No, not a bolt. There are no threads here, forged pins and split pins. He counts the fasteners and falls asleep. In the morning, Ethan goes out before dawn. The air is biting cold. Greystone is even more terrifying in daylight than at dusk. Sagging roofs, boarded-up windows, mud up to his ankles. A dog with protruding ribs lies by the well and doesn't lift its head. People watch in silence. A stranger. In a small town, a stranger stands out immediately. Ethan walks toward the mine. 8 men are huddled around the shaft. The gate creaks, the rope tightens, the bucket creeps upward. Water splashes over the edge. A man tips the bucket into the trough. The water runs down. The next bucket. Ethan counts, 12 buckets an hour, 3 gallons each, 36 gallons. The inflow is 30. They're barely keeping up. Barely. By evening, they'll be exhausted and the rate will drop by half. No one pumps at night. Overnight, the water will rise 2 feet. In the morning, it starts all over again. An endless war they're losing, slowly but surely. A burly red-haired man with a beard down to his chest notices him. "What do you want?" "I want to look at the mine." "There's nothing to look at. Water." Ethan asks if there's a large copper kettle in town. The redhead looks at him like he's crazy. Says old Bren has a brewing kettle sitting idle. There's a foundryman. Bren is the foundryman. The best in the province. He casts church bells. There's a tanner. Ethan turns and walks back. The redhead yells after him that he still hasn't said who he is. Ethan doesn't turn around. He's already calculating. A cylinder. Copper. 20 inches. Bren's cauldron for remelting. A piston. A wooden disc covered in leather. Leatherworker found. A balance bar. A 12-foot oak beam. Any boiler that holds pressure slightly above atmospheric. The main thing is air tightness. Pipes. Lead is easier to work with, but it wrinkles. He knows what happens to lead in water. Only copper. He returns to Margaret, sits down by the hearth, takes a piece of coal and a scrap of board, and sketches. Margaret stands behind him. A diagram takes shape on the board. A boiler at the bottom, a cylinder above it, a balance beam on a support. A rod extends into the shaft. The lines are straight, the proportions are precise. He draws as if copying from a book he sees before him. What is this? A machine that pumps water, without people, without horses, fueled by coal and fire. Margaret is silent for a long time. How much water? 200 buckets an hour. 8 men make 12. She is silent even longer. What do you need? Ethan bends his fingers. Brenna's copper boiler, a ton of coal, 2 blacksmiths, and make sure the priest doesn't stick his nose in here. Margaret doesn't smile. She looks him in the eyes. Silently, she pours a mug of beer. This isn't consent. It's more than that. It's the first moment in 2 years when this woman has decided that maybe she shouldn't give up. Ethan drinks, sour and warm, the best beer of his life. He sets down the mug and says that in 40 days the mine will be dry. Margaret nods. Then she murmurs quietly. The mine is called Tomasova Pit. That's what it was called even before she was born. No one remembers why. And at the sound of that name, a chill runs down Ethan's spine. In the family sodom, Margaret leads him to Bren. The foundry stands by a stream that has dried up to a trickle. Inside, it's hot and smells of scale. Bren is in his 60s, a lean, wiry old man with hands like tree bark. He looks up at Ethan. Margaret says the foreman is taking on the job of draining the mine. Bren doesn't laugh, too old to laugh at what he doesn't understand. How? Ethan shows him the board. Bren runs his finger along the lines. He pauses at the cylinder. What size? 20 inches in diameter, 3 feet. Walls 1.5 inches thick, smooth on the inside. Bren looks up, and for the first time, there's no fatigue in his eyes. I have never cast a cylinder. Bells, hinges, but not a cylinder. I'll show you how to make the mold. Bren stares at him for 10 seconds. My copper and my coal cost money. Margaret says she'll pay in silver when the mine dries up. Bren shakes his head. You can't heat a furnace with promises. Margaret pulls a heavy purse from her bosom. She places it on the anvil. Her last money. Ethan can see it in her face. She's putting everything on the line. Bren weighs the purse in his hand. He nods. Ethan exhales. The first step is taken. He takes a piece of iron from the edge of the furnace, and that's when something he didn't expect happens. The metal speaks to him, not with words, through sensation. Too much carbon, the structure is coarse. They forged it too hot. It'll work for an axle, not for the boiler. He puts the iron back. His hands tremble slightly. He has just realized what his subconscious had sensed. He hasn't just been transported to another world. He has become more than he was. 15 years of experience have concentrated and sharpened like a blade. He didn't gain magic. He gained himself. A better version, the one that had always been hidden at the bottom of his memory. 40 days. He has 40 days to build a machine that was first assembled in his world in 1712. From materials that are inferior, with tools that are rougher, with assistants who don't know what a piston is. He clenches his fists. Fine, so be it. On the 4th day, Ethan stands knee-deep in clay in Brenna's yard, molding a cylinder. The work is dirty and tedious. First, a wooden template, a round log of elm that he'd been whittling down for 2 days with an axe and a plane until the diameter was exactly 20 inches. Then the template is coated with clay mixed with horse manure and straw, layer by layer. Each layer dries for a day by the fire. Bren stands nearby and watches. He doesn't help. He just watches. On the 3rd day of molding, he says Ethan is doing it wrong. He says the clay will crack when poured because the layer applied at once is too thick. Ethan stops. He looks at the old man. Bren is right. Ethan knows the Newcomen engine down to the last bolt, but he's never in his life made a casting mold out of clay and manure. In his world, there were steel molds and molding sand and sandblasting. None of that exists here. He nods. He asks Bren how to do it right. Bren silently picks up a trowel and demonstrates. A thin layer, let it dry. Another layer, let it dry. A thin layer of ash between the layers so the clay doesn't stick to the mold. Ethan takes it in. Bren knows his craft. He doesn't know what a steam engine is, but he knows clay and copper and fire better than Ethan ever will. This is the first lesson. Ethan came here with blueprints in his head, but without hands that know how to work with this world. He needs people. He needs their hands and their experience. He can't build anything on his own. A week goes by working on the mold. Over that week, Ethan gets to know Greystone. 600 souls. There were 1,200 3 years ago before the drought. 2 mines, both flooded. 1 mill, standing idle without water. A tavern, a church. Brenna's blacksmith shop. The apothecary's shop. The town hall with its crooked porch. And the priest, Father Colum, a gentle, round man in his 50s with kind eyes and a quiet voice. He comes to see Margaret on the 6th day. He sits down at the table. He drinks the herbal tea offered to him and asks Ethan directly what he is building. Ethan answers directly. A machine for pumping water, powered by fire and steam. Father Colum does not flinch. He doesn't cross himself. He slowly sets down his cup and says that 3 centuries ago, the Church of the Two Fires declared any movement without a living will to be heresy. He says that fire is sacred. Water is sacred. To force them to work together is to falsify a miracle. He says that people are burned for this. Ethan looks at the priest. Father Colum isn't threatening. He's warning. There's a difference. Ethan asks what will happen to the town if the mine isn't drained. Father Colum is silent. He knows the answer. By spring, Greystone will be gone. People will leave or die. The mine stands. No one has canceled the tax from the capital. There is no silver. Ethan says his machine is no miracle. It's a kettle with water. The water boils. Steam rises. The steam pushes the piston. The piston pumps the water. No will, no magic. Just hot water that wants to become cold. Father Colum listens. He thinks. He says he'll come to see it when the machine is ready, and that until then, he'll keep quiet. But if any of the parishioners report it to the Order of the Two Fires, he won't be able to stop them. Ethan nods. The clock is ticking. On the 8th day, hell breaks loose. Ethan arrives at the smithy and sees the 2 blacksmiths Margaret hired for the job. The Doran and Cale brothers, both burly, both vicious. Doran is the older one. He's 40, 20 years at the forge. He looks at Ethan's blueprint and says, it's nonsense. He says copper won't flow into a mold like that. He says no steam will lift water 40 feet. He says they've been working here for 20 years and don't need advice from some newcomer. Ethan stands and listens. He understands Doran. A stranger has arrived, young, with an accent, no tools, no workshop, and he's telling people who've worked with their hands their whole lives that they're doing it wrong. Of course they're angry. Ethan doesn't argue. He walks over to the forge, picks up a piece of iron, puts it in the fire, waits, takes it out when the color turns dark cherry. Bren watches. Doran watches. Ethan places the iron on the anvil and strikes, evenly, precisely. 30 blows. The strip stretches. Ethan flips it over. 20 more blows. He bends the edge, makes a loop, cools it in a bucket, lifts the finished bracket, even, symmetrical. Doran takes the bracket, turns it in his hands. He is silent. Ethan isn't a better blacksmith than Doran, but he knows metal. He feels it. He knows when to strike and when to stop. And Doran sees that. He says a word. He places the bracket on the workbench and picks up a hammer. From that moment on, he works. Not because he believed, because he saw. Days turn into weeks. The work progresses slowly, too slowly. The cylinder mold is ready on the 12th day. Bren smelts copper from an old brewing kettle. The casting is scheduled for the 13th day. Ethan doesn't sleep the night before the pour. He sits by the mold and checks every seam, every crack, every air channel. Bren comes before dawn. He looks at Ethan. He says that getting nervous is a bad omen. Ethan replies that he isn't nervous, just checking. Bren smirks. He says it's the same thing. The pouring. Copper flows into the mold like an orange river. The heat is so intense that Ethan steps back 3 paces. Bren stays put. He's used to it. The copper fills the mold. It hisses. It smokes. Steam bursts from the air channels. Ethan counts the seconds. The mold holds. It doesn't crack. Bren nods. A good sign. The copper cools for 2 days. On the 15th day, they break the mold. Ethan looks at the cylinder, and his heart sinks. A cavity. An air bubble trapped in the wall during casting, the size of a fist. The wall is thinner than paper in that spot. The cylinder won't withstand the pressure. It's no good. Ethan stands and stares at the piece of copper that consumed all of Margaret's money. Bren stands nearby, silent. Doran stands in the doorway, silent. Margaret stands behind Doran. She is silent. The silence is so thick you can hear a sheep bleating behind the wall. Ethan looks up. He asks Bren if there's any more copper. Bren shakes his head. Nope, all the copper is in this cylinder. Ethan closes his eyes. He thinks. A blueprint unfolds in his mind, not of the cylinder, another one. The cylinder can be patched up. No, it can't. Under steam pressure, the patch will fly off. They could remelt it and pour it in again, but the mold is gone. They broke it. The new mold would take another week, and they don't have a week. The water in the mine is rising. The gate is working slower every day because the men are getting tired and leaving. Ethan opens his eyes. He tells Bren they need different copper. He asks what else in town is made of copper. Bren thinks. He says there's a bell hanging in the church. Ethan and Bren look at each other. They both understand. Ethan says, no, the church bell must not be touched. Father Colum is already on the edge. If they take down the bell, it's the end. Brenna nods. She thinks some more. Then she says slowly that there are old utensils in the town hall basement. Copper basins, copper jugs. Many years ago, the former baron confiscated the property of some craftsmen. Ethan asks how much copper is there. Bren says she doesn't know. Maybe there's enough, maybe not. Ethan heads to City Hall. The mayor has the key. The mayor is a small, timid man who doesn't want any trouble. Margaret says 3 words to him. The mayor hands over the key. Ethan goes down to the basement. It's dark. He flicks open his Zippo. The flame illuminates shelves of junk, dust and cobwebs, copper basins, pitchers, doorknobs, candlesticks. He estimates by eye, 60 pounds, maybe 70. Not quite enough. But if he adds the defective cylinder to the mix, it might be enough when they melt it down. And then the light from the Zippo falls on the far corner of the basement. There's something is covered with a burlap sack. Ethan walks over. He lifts the burlap and freezes. A copper cylinder, old, green with patina, 15 inches in diameter. Next to it, an iron balancer, a connecting rod, and something resembling a base for a swinging beam. Someone had already built this. Here, in this city. Ethan drops to his knees. He takes the cylinder in his hands, runs his fingers over the inner surface, smooth, machined. Not perfect, but surprisingly well made for its time. He turns the cylinder over and sees an inscription stamped on the bottom. The letters are small, worn away by time, but legible. In English. T. Reed, 1743. Ethan sets the cylinder on the floor. His hands aren't shaking, but his heart is pounding so hard he can hear it in his ears. 1743. Someone from his world was here, 80 years ago, according to the local calendar. And that someone was building a steam pump, and didn't finish it, or finished it and was stopped. Ethan leaves the basement. Margaret is waiting upstairs. He tells her he found enough copper to melt down. He doesn't say anything about the cylinder or the inscription. Not yet. Too many questions with no answers. He returns to Brennan. He says that tomorrow they'll start making a new mold. Bren asks where the money will come from. Ethan takes the Zippo lighter off his wrist. He places it on the workbench. He clicks the lid. A flame flares up, steady and bright. Bren looks at the fire that appears out of nowhere in a small metal box. She stares at it for a long time. Then she looks up at Ethan. Ethan says it's not magic. It's a mechanism. Flint and a wick and liquid fuel. Bren a Zippo. He clicks it himself, opens it, closes it, opens it. Flame, no flame. Flame. He smirks. The first smile Ethan has seen on that face. Bren says he'll start tomorrow. For free. Because he's curious now. Ethan exhales. Second form, second attempt. He has 25 days left all told. The new form is ready in 6 days. Bren works like a man possessed. Something clicked in the old man after the Zippo. He no longer looks at Ethan's blueprints with skepticism. He looks at them with hunger, like a man who has been casting bells his whole life and suddenly realized that copper could be something more. Ethan shows him every step, explains why every air channel is needed, why the mold walls must be of uniform thickness, why the clay must be sifted 3 times. Bren listens and nods. Sometimes he corrects him. His corrections are always precise. 30 years at the furnace give you an understanding of the material that no mental model can replace. The second pour. The 22nd day since Ethan's arrival. The copper flows into the mold. Ethan stands at the edge and counts. Bren monitors the temperature by the color of the metal. Doran pumps the bellows. Cale feeds the coal. 4 people, 1 blueprint. The copper cools for a day, then another day. On the 24th day, they break the mold. The cylinder lies on the ground, smooth, even, no pits. The walls are of uniform thickness. Ethan takes a stick and taps the cylinder from the inside. The sound is clear, even, like a bell. Bren stands nearby, breathing heavily, not from fatigue, from excitement. He has cast the finest piece of his life, and he knows it. Ethan places a hand on his shoulder. He says nothing. There's no need. Now for the piston, a wooden disc made of stained oak. Haskell the tanner brings the finest tanned bullhide. Ethan cuts it himself, wraps it around the disc, fits it to the cylinder's inner diameter. The clearance must be minimal, but the piston must move freely. Too tight, and it will get stuck. Too loose, and steam will escape. Ethan spends 3 days adjusting it. He takes it out, puts it in, takes it out, puts it in. His hands are scraped raw. The leather is stiff and won't cooperate. Haskell comes over and watches. He says you need to soak the leather in warm lard. Ethan soaks it. The leather softens. The piston fits into the cylinder tightly but freely. Ethan pulls it up. The piston moves with a soft, smacking sound. The air beneath it compresses and pushes the piston back down. The vacuum works. Elementary physics. But in this world, it looks like a miracle. Haskell watches the piston return on its own and quickly walks away. Ethan pays no attention. He has no time. 27 days, 13 left. The boiler. Bren is building a boiler out of sheet copper, riveted. The seams are coated with a mixture of clay and lime. Not perfect, far from perfect, but it'll be enough for 1 atmosphere of pressure above normal. Ethan checks every rivet, every seam. He fills the boiler with water and builds a fire beneath it. He waits. He watches. He listens. The seams hold. Not a single drop. He exhales. The boiler is ready. The balance beam. A 12-foot-long oak beam. Ethan picks it out from a stack at the sawmill. He runs his hand over the wood. The grain is even, few knots. It'll do. Doran shapes the beam over 2 days. Cale makes an iron support for the center of the balance beam. Trestles, a hinge, rough but functional. Ethan assembles the lever system. The balance beam swings freely on its support. One side is the cylinder and piston. The other side is the pump rod that will go down into the shaft. Pipes. That's the hardest part. There are no copper pipes in Greystone. No one to make them. Ethan thinks for 2 days. Then he finds a solution. Wooden pipes. The trunks of young elms hollowed out from the inside. Primitive, unreliable. But it'll do for now. The men from the mining crew hollow out the trunks under his supervision. 10 pipes, each 4 feet long. The joints are wrapped in leather and coated with tar. Ethan knows they'll leak. All wooden pipes leak. But they'll hold long enough for the steam to reach the cylinder from the boiler. For now. Later he'll replace them with copper ones when he has copper. Day 30. Assembly. Ethan hasn't slept for 3 days. Bren hasn't slept for 2. Doran and Kale work in shifts. Margaret brings food and silently sets it on the workbench. She doesn't ask questions. She simply feeds the four men who are doing something she doesn't understand, but on which she has staked her last money. The boiler is set on a stone base at the shaft's mouth. The cylinder is secured to a frame of oak beams. The balance beam rests on a support. The pump rod extends into the shaft. Pipes connect the boiler to the cylinder. Valves. 2 valves. 1 intake valve for steam, 1 for injecting cold water into the condenser. Both are made of copper. Both were made by Bren, based on Ethan's drawings. Both work on the 3rd try after 2 failed attempts. Day 34. The first test. Ethan stokes the fire under the boiler. A small crowd gathers. Margaret, Bren, Doran and Kale, Haskell the tanner, a few miners. Father Colum stands a little way off on the hill and watches. The water in the boiler heats up. Ethan monitors the pressure with a homemade pressure gauge, a glass tube filled with water, the level of which indicates the pressure. Rough, but it works. The pressure rises. Ethan opens the inlet valve. Steam enters the cylinder. The piston rises. The balance beam swings. The pump rod descends into the shaft. Ethan closes the intake valve. He opens the cold water valve. Water is injected into the cylinder. The steam condenses. The pressure in the cylinder drops below atmospheric pressure. Atmospheric pressure pushes the piston down. The rocker arm swings the other way. The pump rod rises. The water rises with it. A bucket of water spills into the trough. Silence. Absolute. Ethan looks at the trough. Water runs down it away from the shaft. He opens the intake valve again. The piston goes up. He closes it. He injects water. The piston goes down. Another bucket. Another. Another. The machine is working. Slowly. Clumsily. With every cycle, something creaks and something clatters, but it works. Ethan stands and counts the cycles. 1 per minute. 3 gallons per cycle. 180 gallons per hour. Not 200, he miscalculated. Losses from piston friction and leaks in the wooden pipes, but 180 gallons is 15 times more than 8 men with a bucket. Marguerite approaches the chute. She dips her hand into the water. She lifts her wet palm. She looks at it. Water runs between her fingers. This water is from the mine where her son drowned. And now this water is coming up on its own, without people, without horses, by the will of fire and steam and iron. Margaret cries, for the first time in 8 years. Bren stands nearby. He crosses himself. Doran stands silently. His face shows no emotion, but he doesn't leave. Father Colum stands on the hill too. He's silent too, but he doesn't leave. However, the machine runs for 12 minutes. In the 13th minute, the wooden pipe bursts with a dull thud. Steam shoots out to the side. Ethan yells for everyone to step back. He rushes to the boiler. He closes the damper. He extinguishes the fire. The machine stops. The pipe has cracked along its entire length. The tar won't hold. Ethan stands in a cloud of steam and looks at the burst pipe. 12 minutes. In 12 minutes, the machine pumped out 36 gallons, as much as 8 men in an hour. Margaret approaches. She asks if it can be fixed. Ethan nods. He says they need a copper pipe, not a wooden one, a copper one. Margaret asks where to get copper. Ethan is silent. He knows where. An old cylinder from the town hall basement. That very one. The one with the inscription. He can melt it down. He'll have enough copper for 2 pipes. But that means destroying the only trace of the person who was here before him. Ethan stands there thinking. Then he tells Bren that he needs that old copper cylinder from the basement, that it needs to be melted down. Bren asks which cylinder. Ethan says the green one standing in the corner behind the burlap. Bren looks at him strangely. He says he knows that cylinder, that his grandfather said some stranger a long time ago. and that later men in gray robes took that stranger away. They took him, and no one ever saw him again. Ethan swallows hard. Men in gray robes. The Order of the Two Fires. So Thomas Ride didn't just disappear. He was killed. For the very same thing Ethan is doing now. For the steam pump. For the heresy of movement without free will. Ethan takes Ride's cylinder from the basement, carries it to the forge, places it in front of Bren, tells him to melt it down. Bren takes the old copper in his hands, runs his finger over the inscription, looks at Ethan. Ethan looks at him. Bren nods and places the cylinder in the crucible. Thomas Ride's copper will become a pipe for Ethan Cross's machine. One engineer passes the baton to another 80 years later, even if neither of them planned it that way. 3 days on the pipes. Bren pulls a sheet of copper over a mandrel, bends it, rivets the seam. 2 pipes, each 4 feet long. The seam is coated with lead solder, not perfect, but 1,000 times better than wood. Day 38. Ethan replaces the wooden pipes with copper ones. He checks the joints, tightens the clamps, stokes the fire. The boiler heats up, the pressure rises. Ethan opens the valve, steam flows into the cylinder, the piston rises, the connecting rod strikes, water spills into the trough. 1 minute, 2, 5, 10, 30, an hour. The machine is running. It doesn't stop. The pipes hold. The seams don't leak. Ethan sits on a rock by the mine shaft and watches the connecting rods swing up and down, steadily, evenly, like a heartbeat. Margaret stands nearby, silent. By evening, the whole town gathers at the mine, 600 people. They stand and watch. An ugly black machine, twice the height of a man, strikes the pendulum and spits out water. Smoke rises from beneath the boiler into the gray sky. Steam whistles through the cracks. The roar is so loud that you can only talk by shouting. But the water is flowing. With every blow, a bucketful spills from the shaft into the trough. Ethan counts. 190 gallons an hour, almost 200. He was 1 day late. Not 40 days, but 41. The cylinder had to be refilled, but the shaft will be dry in a week. Margaret stands in the crowd. She's crying and doesn't wipe away her tears. Brenna crosses himself. The old foundryman crosses himself, looking at the machine he cast himself. Father Colum stands on his hill. He watches. Then he slowly makes his way down. He approaches the machine. He walks around it. He stands before the furnace. He looks at the fire. He looks at the water. He turns to Ethan. He says quietly that he doesn't know if this is heresy or not, but that the city will live, and that as long as the city lives, he will remain silent. Ethan nods. That's enough. Enough for now. The mine dries out for 7 days. On the 3rd day, the water recedes enough that the first veins of silver are visible in the shaft walls, dark streaks in the wet rock. Miners descend for the first time in 2 years. Red-haired Torin, who asked Ethan about the copper cauldron on the first day, now stands knee-deep in the receding water and shouts up that he sees a vein as thick as a finger. The crowd at the shaft buzzes. Silver. Living silver in a living mine. Greystone will live. Ethan doesn't go down. He stands by the machine and monitors the pressure. Coal has to be shoveled in every 20 minutes. The valves have to be switched manually. It's a job for 2, and he's teaching Doran. Doran listens in silence. He remembers it the first time. His hands are quick and precise. By the end of the 2nd day, he's operating the machine on his own. Ethan stands to the side and watches. Doran is at the valves. Cale shovels coal. The machine runs without Ethan. This is important, more important than it seems. Because if the machine only runs while Ethan stands nearby, then it's not a machine. It's a trick. and a trick will die with the magician. The machine must live without him. Otherwise, it's all meaningless. On the 5th day, the problem Ethan was expecting arises. The piston ring is wearing out. Friction against the copper cylinder walls wears it down. The clearance increases. Steam begins to leak past the piston. Efficiency drops. Instead of 190 gallons per hour, the machine produces 120, then 100, then 80. Ethan stops the machine. He removes the piston. The lining is worn through. Hask brings a new one. Ethan replaces the lining. He starts it up. 190 again. But in 4 days, the leather will have to be replaced again, and again, and again. Every stop means lost hours. Every replacement means using up leather, which costs money. Ethan thinks. A blueprint of a piston with metal sealing rings unfolds in his mind. Piston rings. A simple idea. A ring of soft metal sitting in a groove on the piston. It springs outward, pressing against the cylinder wall. It doesn't wear out like leather. It lasts for months. But that requires brass and precision machining. Brenna doesn't have brass. Brenna doesn't have a lathe. Ethan puts the piston rings off for later. Right now, leather. Then rings. Then a lathe. Then brass. Each task leads to the next. It's an endless chain, and he's standing right at the very beginning of it. On the 7th day, the mine is dry. Completely. Right to the bottom. The miners work in 3 shifts. The silver is flowing. The first ore is hauled up in baskets. Margaret stands by the smelting furnace and watches as white metal emerges from the black stone. Silver. Money. Life. Gray stone will survive the winter. Ethan sits on the porch of Margaret's house and drinks acorn broth. Bitter and strange. He's gotten used to it. The evening is quiet. Smoke from the machine's chimney is visible across the valley, a thin gray line against the dark sky. That line can be seen far away, very far away. And Ethan thinks about this. Smoke cannot be hidden. The sound cannot be muffled. The whistle of the steam can be heard 2 miles away. Everyone who passes by Greystone will see and hear what should not be there. A machine that operates without a living will. Heresy, according to the laws of the Church of the Two Fires. He needs time. Time and protection. And only one person in the province can provide both. Baroness Haldvika. Margaret tells him about Rowena Ashford, 22 years old, red-haired, stubborn, the daughter of a baron who died of a fever and left her a barony with 12,000 gold pieces in debt. Rowena arrives on horseback alone, without an entourage, a small, shaggy mountain horse, a simple traveling cloak, dirty boots. She dismounts in Margaret's courtyard and, instead of heading to the house, goes straight to the mine. She stands and stares at the machine for a long time. Ethan approaches. Rowena doesn't turn around. She asks, without looking, who he is. Ethan says he's a master. Rowena says a master is someone who fixes a bridge when it falls. But he isn't fixing a bridge. He's building something she doesn't have a name for. Ethan says there is a name for it. A steam pump. Rowena repeats the words slowly. A steam pump. Then she turns and looks at him. A freckled face, green eyes, a stern gaze. She asks how much silver the mine will yield in a season. Ethan replies that he doesn't know. He's an engineer, not a miner. Margaret approaches and says that according to old records, the vein yields about 300 pounds of silver a year at full capacity. Rowena counts in her head. Ethan watches her move her lips. She calculates slowly. She frowns. She loses her place. She starts over. Ethan understands. She doesn't know how to calculate quickly. She wasn't taught that. She was taught to embroider and ride horses and run a household, not to count. Rowena finishes her calculation. She says that 300 pounds of silver is about 4,000 gold pieces. That's a third of the debt. It can be paid off in 3 years if nothing happens. But something always happens. Ethan asks, what if there were not one mine, but 4? Rowena looks at him. He asks, what if each mine had the same pump? 4 mines, 1,200 pounds of silver a year, 16,000 gold pieces. The debt is paid off in a single season, and there's still money left over. Rowena is silent. Then she says she doesn't have the money for 4 pumps. Ethan says the money will be there. The silver from the first mine will go to the second. The silver from the second mine will go to the third and fourth. Each machine pays for itself in 2 months of operation. After that, pure profit. Rowena is silent for a long time. She looks at the machine. She looks at Ethan. Then she says that the church will burn him before he builds the second pump.
Ethan says that for this he needs the Baroness, the charter, a document declaring Ethan's workshop part of the Baron's estate. Under the protection of the Baron's court, not the church's. It won't protect him from the order of the 2 fires, but it will force them to act through the courts rather than with torches. Rowena shakes her head. She says that if she signs the charter, the order will come for her too. Ethan nods. He knows. But he has no other choice. And neither does she. 12,000 gold in debt, a steam pump, 4 mines, 16,000 gold. The numbers speak for themselves. Rowena stands by the machine. The balance beam clangs. Water splashes. Steam whistles. She stands and thinks. Ethan waits. Margaret waits. Bren stands in the smithy doorway and waits. The whole town stands and waits, though they don't know what for. Rowena says she'll sign the charter, but on one condition. Ethan listens. Rowena says she wants to understand, not just believe that the machine works, to understand why it works. To understand the numbers, to understand the calculations. If she is putting her name and her barony under the protection of his machines, she wants to know what lies behind every cog. Ethan looks at her. For the first time in all these days, he almost smiles. He says he will teach her. Rowena nods. She leaves. She returns 3 days later with a charter signed and sealed with the Baron's seal, and with the barony's ledger, which she brought for Ethan to look at. He opens the book that evening by the light of a tallow candle. Columns of numbers, the late Baron's scrawled handwriting, expenses, revenues, debts, taxes. The numbers don't add up. The Baron was bad at math, or he was good at math but was stealing from himself. Ethan sits over the book until morning. When Margaret gets up to stoke the stove, he already knows 3 things. The barony doesn't owe 12,000. It owes 8. The Baron made a mistake in his calculations when accounting for the harvest over 3 years. The difference is 4,000 gold pieces. That doesn't save Roven, but it means that 1 mine almost covers the difference. 2 mines pay off the debt in 2 years. 4 mines make Haldvik the richest barony in the province. Ethan closes the book. He needs to build a calculating machine for Rowena, a wooden box with gears that can add and subtract, so it never loses count in the 5th column again, so it can check every number itself. He adds this to the list of things that need to be built. It's already long, and it gets longer every day. Winter comes early and harshly. The first snow falls in mid-October and doesn't melt. The north wind beats against the walls so hard that the cracks in the stonework whistle. The machine at the mine runs non-stop. Doran and Kale take turns every 8 hours. Coal is brought in by wagon from an old pit 3 miles to the east. The road is muddy and becomes impassable by November. Ethan organizes a horse-drawn convoy, pack horses, 10 miles a day, 300 pounds of coal on each. It's just enough. The silver is flowing. Margaret sells the first batch to a middleman from the neighboring town.
40 pounds of pure silver. The money goes toward food, toward coal, toward the miners' wages, toward the leather for the piston, which has to be replaced every 5 days. Nothing is left. But the town is alive. People are eating. The children aren't crying from hunger.
That's enough for now.
In November, Soyeon Park arrives, a petite woman with Asian features and a mole behind her ear. She comes with a trade caravan that is stopped in Gracetown for the night. The caravan is heading south. Soyeon stays, because she sees the numbers. She stands at Margaret's counter and looks at the records. Margaret keeps track of the coal and silver on wax tablets. The numbers are off. The totals are approximate. Soyeon takes a tablet and recalculates everything in 10 minutes. She finds an error of 3 pounds of silver. Margaret looks at her. Soyeon puts down the tablet and apologizes. She says it's a habit, that back home she used to do the counting at the temple. Ethan learns about her that evening over dinner. Margaret tells him, a woman from a distant island kingdom. She knows how to count quickly and accurately. She found an error in the accounts in 10 minutes. Ethan asks for her to be brought to him. Soyeon arrives. She sits down at the table quietly, hands on her knees, eyes downcast. The habit of a person who has been taught all her life that her intelligence is a disgrace. Ethan places a sheet of paper in front of her.
He says he needs to calculate the daily coal consumption for the pump at different operating speeds. He gives her the figures. The weight of coal per load, the burning time, the number of cycles per hour. Soyeon picks up a brush. She writes. She calculates. Columns of characters and numbers flow onto the paper smoothly and quickly. 5 minutes later, she looks up and gives 3 numbers. Consumption at full power, consumption at half power, consumption at a quarter. Ethan checks the figures in his head. She's right. Accurate to the second decimal after the decimal point. He looks at her. He says she has the best mind in this town. He says he needs someone who can calculate to 3 decimal places. He asks her to sit next to him. Soyeon freezes. She stands in the middle of the room. She doesn't move. Probably for a minute. Then she sits down. She picks up a brush, and she starts working. From that day on, she doesn't leave. Soyeon takes on all the workshop's bookkeeping for the first week. By the second week, she's already handling the mines books. By the end of the month, Margaret hands over all the calculations to her. The figures are no longer approximate. Every pound of coal is accounted for. Every pound of silver is recorded. Every expense is broken down by category. For the first time, Ethan sees the full picture of Greystone's economy. And the picture is grim. The town spends more than it earns. The silver from a single mine covers current expenses, but does not cover the machine's wear and tear. Leather for the piston has to be bought from Haskell. Coal has to be hauled in from the pit. The copper for repairs is running out. In 6 months, the machine will grind to a halt if there are no spare parts. And there won't be any spare parts because there's no money. Ethan sits poring over the spreadsheets with Jan and thinks. He needs a second mine. He needs a second pump. He needs profits that will cover not only current expenses, but also development. But a second pump means a second cylinder, a second boiler, a second set of valves and pipes. Where to get the copper, where to get the people, where to find the time. And then Rowena arrives. She arrives in December, on horseback, in a blizzard, alone. She enters Margaret's house, covered in snow, her face red from the cold. She sits down by the hearth. She takes a piece of paper out of her bag. She says she received a letter from the king's office, a tax audit. The inspector will arrive in 2 weeks. He'll inspect the mine, check the income, inspect the machine. Ethan asks what will happen. Rowena says the inspector might impose a separate tax on the machine, might confiscate the silver. He might just write a report to the Order of the Two Fires. It depends on who they send. Ethan asks if they can bribe the inspector. Rowena shakes her head. Not this time.
The king's inspectors change every year. It's impossible to predict who will arrive. Ethan thinks. So-yeon thinks. Margaret thinks. 3 people sit by the hearth in a dark house and think about how to save the car from a man they haven't even seen yet. So-yeon speaks first. She says the inspector will come to check the mine's income, so we need to show him the income, the correct income, no more and no less than required. She says that if the mine tax has been paid in full and on time, the inspector has no formal grounds for confiscation. She says that formally the machine is part of the baron's estate under the Charter of Rowena.
That means it's subject to the baron's tax, not the industrial tax. And the baron's tax is 3 times lower.
Rowena looks at So-yeon, then she looks at Ethan. She asks where she is from. Ethan says, from a distant island kingdom. Rowena nods. She says she needs someone like that at court. So-yeon bows, but she stays where she is, next to Ethan. She has already made her choice. 2 weeks until the inspector arrives. Ethan uses them for something else, for what he'd been putting off from the very beginning. School. 8 students, 4 boys and 4 girls, aged 10 to 14. A shed behind Margaret's house, which Ethan has cleaned out and furnished with benches and a blackboard. He found chalk at the apothecary's. Ethan stands before 8 pairs of eyes and realizes he doesn't know where to start. He's an engineer, not a teacher. He knows how to build machines, not explain numbers to children. But he needs people who can count. In 2 years, he'll need assistants who can read blueprints and maintain tolerances. In 5 years, he'll need engineers. And engineers don't just fall from the sky. They have to be trained. He starts with arithmetic, addition, subtraction, multiplication.
The kids pick it up fast, especially one girl, skinny, black-haired, with burned hands. Lisa Brenna, the granddaughter of an old foundryman. She's 11 years old, and she calculates faster than the other 7 put together. Ethan notices this on the second day. He gives her a harder problem. She solves it. He gives her another. She solves it. He gives her a problem that would stump half his students in Pittsburgh. Lisa chews on the tip of her charcoal pencil. She thinks. She writes down the answer. It's correct. Ethan looks at her. Then he looks at Brenna, who is standing in the barn doorway watching. Brenna shakes her head. She says the girl has no place in school, that she needs to get married in 5 years. Ethan doesn't say anything to Brenna. He turns to Lisa and says that tomorrow he'll show her how the valve is built. Lisa nods. Her eyes are shining. Brenna leaves, silently. The inspector arrives in early January, a short, thin man in a fine suit. His name is Morden. He doesn't smile. He doesn't frown. His face is like an accountant's. He dismounts at the town hall, and the first thing he asks is where the mine is. Rowena leads him herself. Ethan walks beside her.
So-yeon follows them with a folder of papers. Morden sees the machine. He stops. He looks. He walks around it, doesn't touch it. Looks at the smoke, at the steam, at the balance beam, at the water in the trough. Then he turns to Rowena and asks what it is. Rowena says it's a pumping device on the Baron's estate's balance sheet, a mechanism for pumping out water. Morden asks on what basis. Rowena shows him the document. Morden reads it, slowly, twice. The charter is drawn up correctly. So-yeon checked every word. Morden asks what income the mine generated for the season. So-yeon opens a folder. Numbers, columns, totals. Every figure is backed up by a record. Every pound of silver is documented. Morden checks. He counts it himself. He counts more slowly than So-yeon. He finds everything to be correct. The tax has been paid, in full. Even with the small overpayment that So-yeon had included on purpose, because an overpayment is a sign of loyalty. Morden closes the folder. He looks at the carriage. He looks at Ethan. He asks who he is. Ethan says he is a craftsman in the Baroness's service.
Morden is silent.
Then he says he will report to the Chancellery that an unusual mechanism for pumping water is being used in the province of Haldvik, and that he recommends sending a specialist to assess it. Not an inquisitor, a specialist. Morden leaves the next day. Ethan stands on the porch and watches as his horse disappears over the hill. So-Yan stands beside him. She says they've bought some time, maybe 3 months, maybe 6. It depends on how quickly the Chancellery sends a specialist. Ethan nods. 3 months or 6. In that time, they need to build a second pump, a third, a fourth. They need to make Greystone so valuable to the Crown that taking it would cost more than keeping it. He turns toward the workshop. Bren stands by the forge. Doran and Kale are at the anvils. Lisa sits in the corner, drawing with charcoal on a plank something resembling a valve. Margaret is carrying a pot of porridge from the house. So-Yan takes out a brush and opens a blank sheet of paper. Ethan enters the workshop. He sits down at the workbench. He takes the charcoal and begins to sketch the second pump. Better than the first, taking the mistakes into account, with copper pipes from the very start. With a double set of valves. With a modified piston in which leather is wrapped around a wooden disc, overlapping and greased with lard so it will last twice as long. He sketches and thinks. 40 days for the first pump. The second one can be done in 25. Bren knows how to make the mold. Doran knows how to assemble it. Kale knows how to forge the fasteners. Lisa knows how the valve works. People are learning. A machine that only one person knows how to operate is a weakness. A machine that 6 people know is a strength. Ethan is drawing. Snow is falling outside the window. The pipe of the first pump smokes steadily and evenly. Greystone's heart is beating. For now, it's beating. So-Yan Park stayed in Greystone and took over the bookkeeping. Royal Inspector Morden inspected the mine and left without finding any violations, thanks to So-Yan's impeccable documentation. Ethan opened a school for 8 students, where Lisa Bren stands out, and began designing a second, improved pump. Ethan builds the second pump in 23 days, not 25 as he had planned. Faster because Bren now knows the design by heart. Because Doran assembles the counterweight without a blueprint. Because Kale forges the fasteners with his eyes closed. A team. The first pump was built by one man with assistance. The second is built by a team. The difference is enormous. The pump is installed at the second mine, 3 miles west of Greystone. The mine is called Widow's Well. It has been flooded for 2 years. There is no owner. Rowena transfers it to the Baron's estate with a stroke of her pen. The launch proceeds uneventfully. No crowds, no tears. Doran stokes the fire. Kale stands by the valves. The machine strikes the balance beam. Water flows. Ethan sits on a rock and records the readings. Pressure, cycle frequency, coal consumption. So-Yan stands nearby and transcribes the numbers into her book. A week later, Widow's Well is dry. There is no silver there. There is copper. Copper ore in veins within the gray rock. When Ethan finds out, he nearly falls over. Copper. His own copper. No more need to melt down other people's cauldrons and church bells. His own source of material for cylinders and pipes and valves. He stands before the vein and calculates. At current output, Greystone can produce enough copper to build 1 pump a month. 1 pump a month. In a year, the 12 mines in the province will be dry. In 2 years, every mine in Haldvik will be operational. This changes everything. Rowena arrives when she hears about the copper. She stands in front of the vein. She is silent. Then she says quietly that her father had been searching for this vein for 30 years. Drilling, digging, hiring prospectors. He didn't find it. Because it was underwater. Under that very water that no one could pump out. Ethan says he can now. Rowena nods.
Then she asks how much the pump costs. Ethan calculates. Materials, labor, coal for the first week. He names a figure. Rowena calculates in her head. She loses track. She grimaces. Ethan remembers. The calculating machine. He promised. It's time. He builds it in 10 days. A wooden box the size of a bread bin. Inside, gears carved from solid beech. 10 wheels, one for each digit. Turning a wheel 1 notch adds a unit. When a wheel makes a full rotation, it shifts the next wheel by 1 step. Carryover. Automatic. The simplest mechanical calculator. In his world, they made things like this in the 17th century. Pascal, Leibniz. Here, it looks like a miracle. Ethan brings the machine to Rowena at the Baron's house. He places it on the table in front of her, shows her how to enter numbers, how to add, how to subtract. Rowena takes the input pen, enters a number, turns it, reads the result. Enters another, turns it, reads it. Faster than in her head, without mistakes. She sits at the machine all evening, recalculates the barony's annual budget. Every line item, every tax, every debt. By midnight, she has the exact picture. The barony owes not 12,000 nor 8, as Ethan had calculated. 7,400. The baron had been systematically mistaken in his calculations. Every year he added too much. Rowena sits poring over the papers. Next to her stands a bottle of wine she brought from the cellar. Ethan sits across from him. Rowena pours him a glass, pours herself one, drinks in silence. Then she says she's been afraid of these numbers her whole life, that every night she'd lie down and think about the 12,000 hanging over her like an axe, and that now the axe has become half as heavy.
It hasn't disappeared, but it's become lighter. Ethan says that in 2 years, the axe will be gone entirely. Rowena looks at him. Her eyes are red from fatigue and from the wine. She says she believes him. For the first time in 3 years, she believes it might work out. Ethan finishes his wine. He stands up. He says it's time for him to go. Rowena nods. He leaves. He stops on the porch. The air is cold and clear. The stars are bright. He looks up, and he sees something he hadn't noticed before. 3 stars forming an equilateral triangle. Bright, motionless. A constellation that isn't on any map of his native sky. Ethan stands and looks at them. Then he turns away and walks toward Margaret's house. Questions later. Work comes first. February, the 3rd month of winter, the hardest one. The coal runs out faster than it's delivered. The road is frozen and the horses slip on the ice. One horse breaks its leg. It has to be put down. Ethan loses 10% of his carrying capacity. With Jon recalculates the reserves. At the current rate of coal consumption, there's enough for 3 weeks for 2 pumps. Then one of them will have to be shut down.
Shutting down a pump means losing the mine. The water will come back within a day. Ethan thinks he needs to reduce coal consumption. A blueprint unfolds in his mind. Not a new engine, an improvement to the old one. A condenser. A separate chamber for steam condensation instead of injecting cold water directly into the cylinder. James Watt's idea. As simple as all genius ideas are. If the steam condenses in a separate chamber, the cylinder doesn't cool down after each cycle. No need to waste heat and coal on reheating it. The fuel savings of 30%, at least. But this is no longer Newcomen's engine. This is the next step, Watt's engine. And it requires a precision that Brenna lacks. The condenser must be airtight. The tube from the cylinder to the condenser must be smooth and seamless. The valve between them must operate quickly and precisely. Ethan stands in front of the workbench and thinks. Then he takes a piece of charcoal and sketches. Not a Watt condenser. Simpler. An intermediate option. Cylinder wrapping.
If you wrap the cylinder in felt and cover it with a wooden casing, it will cool down more slowly. Not a condenser, but a 10% savings, maybe 15.
That'll be enough to hold out until spring. Bren and Doran make the wooden casings in 4 days. Sheep's wool is stuffed between the cylinder's copper and the wood. Both pumps are insulated. Coal consumption drops, not by 15%, by 12%. But that's enough. Soyeon recounts the supplies. Enough until the end of March. Just barely, but enough. Ethan exhales. Winter won't kill them, this time. But next winter will be the same, and they need to prepare better for it. At the end of February, what Ethan feared most happens. The boiler of the first pump. That very one, the first one. The one that has been running non-stop for 4 months. Ethan checks it every morning. He taps on the walls. He listens. He looks for cracks. And on the last day of February, he finds one. A thin line on the inner wall of the boiler, near the seam, metal fatigue. The copper is worn out. 4 months of continuous heating and cooling, expansion and contraction, over and over. Metal isn't eternal. Ethan shuts down the machine, releases the pressure, inspects the crack. 4 inches long, not all the way through yet, but in a week it'll break through the wall. And then the boiler will explode. Not a huge one. The pressure in the atmospheric engine is low, but enough to scald anyone standing nearby. Ethan calls for Bren. The old man looks at the crack. He's silent. Then he says he can patch it up, put a patch of sheet copper over it and solder it. Ethan shakes his head. He says the patch will last a month, then the crack will spread. They need a new boiler. Brenna nods. A new boiler means a week's work. A week without a pump at the first shaft. A week during which the water will rise and flood everything they've pumped out. Ethan thinks. Then he makes a decision. A patch, a temporary one, for a month. Over the course of that month, Bren will weld a new boiler. When the new one is ready, they'll swap it out in a single day, quickly, without downtime. Bren nods. He gets to work. Ethan stands by the boiler and looks at the crack. A thin line in the copper, a reminder. Machines aren't eternal. They need to be repaired, replaced, improved, every day, without stopping. Because if you stop, the water will come back. It always comes back. He returns to Margaret's house. She's standing by the new stove he built for her in December. The stove isn't smoking. The draft is right. The stones are laid so that the heat goes into the room and not up the chimney. A small thing. Not an invention, just a stove. But every morning Margaret stands in front of it and warms her hands. And every morning Ethan sees something on her face that wasn't there before. Not a smile. Margaret doesn't smile. But something like peace. As if, for the first time in many years, it's possible to just stand in this house and warm one's hands without thinking about everything falling apart. Ethan sits down at the table. Margaret places a bowl in front of him. Porridge. The same gray porridge as on the first day, but now with meat. Lamb. Thin strands in the hot gruel. The city can afford meat. It's a victory. A small one. An inconspicuous one. But a victory. Spring of the second year. The snow melts in March. The roads turn into rivers of mud and then dry up. Coal is flowing smoothly again. A new boiler at the first mine. The old one has been sent for remelting. 2 pumps are running. Silver and copper are flowing. Greystone is breathing. Ethan thinks it's time to take the next step. A foundry. Not Bren's smithy. A real foundry with a melting furnace capable of maintaining a temperature high enough for bronze. With a molding shop. With room for 5 workers at a time. Bren is old. He needs apprentices. He needs space. And he needs Lisa. Lisa Brenna. She's 12. Over the winter, she's grown 3 inches and become even more awkward. Her arms are long, a braid down to her waist, burns on her fingers from the furnace she sneaks over to every evening after school. Ethan sees her secretly casting a small cross from scraps of copper, working alone, without help, without instructions. The shape is crooked, the casting is uneven, but she's doing it, all by herself, at 12 years old. He comes to Bren, says he's taking Lisa on as an apprentice, says he'll pay. Bren is silent. His face is inscrutable. He loves his granddaughter, but in his world, there's no place for a girl at the forge. A girl's place is at the spinning wheel, or in the kitchen, or in someone else's house with a husband, not at the furnace. Bren stays silent for 3 days. Then he comes to the workshop. He says he's giving Lisa away, but if Ethan hurts her, he'll kill him. Ethan nods. Bren leaves. Lisa stands around the corner. She heard everything. Her eyes are shining. But she doesn't cry. Proud, like her grandfather. They've been building the foundry yard for a month. Stone walls, a tiled roof, 2 furnaces. A melting furnace lined with fire bricks that Ethan taught the locals to make from local clay mixed with quartz sand. A molding shop with workbenches, tools, pliers, crucibles, hammers. Bren walks around the finished yard and runs his hands over the walls. He is silent. Then he says that in 30 years of work, he never had even half of this. Ethan says that now he does. The first order comes from the south, the village of Kernbrook, 40 miles away. Their mine is flooded. Word of the Greystone pump has spread. The village elder arrives on a mule, a small, gray-haired man with suspicious eyes. He looks at the machine. He looks at Ethan. He asks the price. Soyeon quotes it. The elder haggles for 3 hours. Soyeon won't budge a penny. The elder pays half up front, the rest upon startup. The third pump. They build it in 20 days. Ethan doesn't participate in the assembly. Doran assembles it. Kale forges. Bren and Lisa cast the cylinder. Ethan only checks. He stands to the side and watches. He checks the tolerances. He taps the cylinder and listens to the sound. Clear. Even. Lisa cast it with almost no help from her grandfather. She's 12 years old. Her hands remember the temperature at which copper produces the right sound when struck. The pump is shipped to Carnbrook in pieces on 3 wagons. Ethan goes with it. He assembles it on site in 4 days. He starts it up. It works. The elder stands in front of the machine and watches. He pays the balance. Ethan returns to Greystone with the money. The first money earned not from their silver, but from their machines. Soyeon records the amount in the ledger. She underlines it with a double line. It is a special sum, the beginning of something new. Now Greystone doesn't just mine silver. Greystone sells technology. In May, Evelyn Toe arrives. She doesn't arrive. She has always been here. The pharmacist's daughter, 28 years old, quiet. She reads in 3 languages, including Old Church. She wears glasses that Ethan made for her from 2 magnifying glass lenses, hand-polished on a piece of suede. Her eyesight had deteriorated over the years from reading by candlelight. When Ethan brought her the glasses, she put them on and froze. She stood there looking out at the street, at the trees, at the sky, as if she were seeing it all for the first time. Then she took off the glasses and looked at Ethan. Her eyes were wet. She said nothing. She simply put the glasses in her pocket, carefully, as if they were the most precious thing in her life. Evelyn becomes a bridge between Ethan and the church. Father Colum has been silent for 6 months now. But silence does not last forever. An inquisitor, not an inspector, may arrive from the capital, and then Father Colum's silence will not be enough. A theological justification is needed. An argument in the language of the church is needed. Evelyn finds it. She spends 2 weeks in the church library. She reads ancient texts, and she finds a passage in a treatise by Saint Elvar written 400 years ago.
Elvar writes that fire and water are two aspects of God's order, that fire strives upward and water strives downward, that this is their nature given by the Creator,
and that to use the nature of things for the benefit of humanity means not to fake a miracle, but to order the world according to the Creator's design. Just as a plowman orders the earth with a plow, just as a miller orders the grain with a millstone. A fine line. The rhetorician forces the elements to work against their will. The master allows the elements to follow their nature and directs the result. A steam pump does not force fire and water to work together. It allows fire to do what fire always does, heat water. And then it allows water to do what water always does, rise as steam. No violence, no heresy. Order. Father Colum reads Evelyn's note. He reads it 3 times. Then he looks up. He says she is smarter than he is. He says the argument won't stand up to a serious inquisitor's questioning, but it will suffice for the first church hearing. Evelyn nods. That is enough for now. In June, the first envoy from the Water Carriers Guild arrives. His name is Ferric, a fat man in an expensive cloak on an expensive horse. The Water Carriers Guild is a monopoly. For 120 years, they have been pumping out mines throughout the kingdom, by hand, with buckets, with chains of workers, expensive, slow, but monopoly, a royal charter. No one has the right to pump out a mine without a guild license. Ferric arrives and immediately walks over to the machine. He looks, not at the machine, at the chute, at the volume of water. He calculates, panic in his eyes. One machine does the work of 100 men. 3 machines are already running. If there are 30, the Water Carriers Guild will be dead within a year. Ferric goes to Rowena. He demands. He doesn't ask. He demands that the machines be stopped and the outsider be removed from the province. He shows her the royal charter granting the monopoly. Rowena looks at the charter. Then she looks at Ferric. Then she says that the charter applies to the manual pumping of mines, that there isn't a word in the charter about machines, because when the charter was written 120 years ago, machines didn't exist. Ferric blushes. He says the meaning of the charter is obvious. Rowena says the law is the letter, not the meaning, and that the letter is on her side. Ferric leaves, but he'll be back. And next time he won't come alone. Ethan learns about this that evening from Rowena. He stands by the workbench and listens. Then he says they need to hurry. The guild will go to the king. The king won't be able to ignore a complaint from the monopoly that pays him 10,000 gold pieces a year. They need to ensure that by the time the king makes his decision, Greystone will be too valuable to shut down. More mines, more silver, more copper, more money in the treasury. Soyan nods. He says he's already doing the math. He says that by the end of the year, at the current rate, Haldvik will be paying the crown 3 times more in taxes than it did under the living baron. 3 times. That's an argument that will outweigh any monopoly. But we need to make it to the end of the year. Summer of the 2nd year. Ethan is building a lathe, not a steam-powered one. It wouldn't be precise enough for that. A water wheel on the stream by the foundry yard. The stream has run shallow but hasn't dried up. The wheel is small, 6 feet in diameter. It has enough power to turn the spindle. The machine is crude. A wooden bed, iron guides, a cutting tool made of the finest steel Doran could forge. But it works. The first lathe in this world. Ethan clamps a copper blank in it and cuts off the first shavings. A thin, shiny spiral falls to the floor. Bren stands nearby and looks at the shavings. He picks it up, twirls it between his fingers, says that in 30 years at the forge he's never seen metal cut so smoothly. Ethan nods. Now he can machine cylinders, bore the inner surface to a smoothness that hand polishing could never achieve, make valves with a tolerance of 1/100th of an inch, make piston rings. A lathe isn't just a tool.
It's a threshold. Beyond that threshold lies precision. And precision means efficiency. And efficiency means fuel that isn't wasted. It means metal that doesn't end up as scrap. These are machines that run longer and break down less often. The first part turned on the lathe is a valve for the fourth pump. Bronze, perfectly round, lapped to the seat so it doesn't leak a single drop. Ethan installs it in place of the old forged valve. The difference is immediate. Steam losses drop by half. The pump's efficiency jumps from 200 gallons per hour to 240. 40 gallons for free, simply because the valve is made with precision. Lisa stands nearby and watches. Then she asks if she can try. Ethan shows her how to hold the cutter, how to set the feed rate, how to listen to the machine. The machine sings when everything is right, a smooth, high-pitched sound. If the sound changes, something's wrong. The cutter's dull, or the blank is sitting crooked, or the feed is too fast. Lisa listens. She takes the cutter. She cuts out the sleeve. On the third try, it comes out smooth. Ethan checks with a caliper. No, he doesn't have a caliper. He checks with the sleeve. The sleeve fits into the housing tightly and evenly. Lisa is 12 years old. She feels the metal, just like her grandfather, only more precisely. In July, Ethan begins work on the very thing for which he needed the lathe, Watt's engine, not Newcomen's primitive atmospheric engine, a true double-acting engine with a separate condenser. Steam works on both sides of the piston. It pushes both up and down, twice the power, half the coal consumption per unit of work. And most importantly, the regulator, Watt's centrifugal regulator. 2 heavy balls on rods attached to the rotating shaft. As the shaft spins faster, the balls move apart under the action of centrifugal force. Rising, they close the intake valve via a system of levers. Less steam, less power. The shaft slows down. The balls descend. The valve opens. More steam, more power. The shaft accelerates. The balls rise. And so on. An endless cycle. The machine regulates itself, without a human. This isn't just an improvement, it's a principle. Feedback, automatic control, a thing that changed everything in his home world. Ethan sketches the regulator on the board. So-yeon sits beside him and writes down the calculations. The mass of the balls, the length of the rods, the gear ratio from the main shaft to the regulator shaft. The speed at which the balls begin to diverge, the speed at which they reach maximum lift. So-yeon calculates faster than he dictates. She checks every number twice. She finds an error in his gear ratio calculation. Ethan recalculates. She's right. He was off by 3%. 3% is the difference between a machine that maintains its speed and one that goes haywire. He looks at So-yeon. He says that without her, he would have killed someone with that mistake. So-yeon doesn't smile. She says that 3% is an acceptable margin of error when estimating by eye, but unacceptable when designing a regulator. Ethan nods. She speaks his language, the language of precision. He names a unit of measurement in her honor, 1 sora, the margin of error at which the car still runs. So-yeon freezes with the brush in her hand. Ink drips onto the paper. A black drop spreads across the fibers. So-yeon doesn't notice. She looks at Ethan for a long time. Then she lowers her eyes and continues writing. But Ethan sees that the corners of her lips have twitched. For the first time in the 6 months he's known her. August. Watt's engine is ready. Small, 4 feet tall, powerful enough to rotate a shaft at a constant speed. Not a pump, a drive. This engine can turn anything. A millstone, a loom, a rolling mill, anything. Ethan sets it up on a stand in the workshop. He stokes the fire. The pressure rises. He opens the valve. The piston moves. The shaft turns. The regulator starts working. The balls rise slowly. They spread apart. The valve closes slightly. The shaft reaches a steady speed and maintains it. On its own,
without a human. Ethan stands and watches. The balls spin.
The shaft hums. The steam whistles evenly and steadily. The machine breathes. Margaret stands in the doorway. Rowena stands behind her. So-yeon sits at the table with a brush. Lisa stands by the furnace with her hands burned. Evelyn stands by the window wearing Ethan's glasses. 5 women and 1 machine that regulates itself. Ethan says nothing. He stands and watches the copper balls spinning as steadily as a heart. And for the first time since he's been here, he feels that this isn't a dream, that this is his life. New. Real. His. Autumn of the 2nd year. Ethan installs Watt's engine on the rolling mill. 2 heavy cast iron rolls that Bren cast on his 5th try. The first 4 cracked during hardening. Cast iron is a capricious material. Cool it too fast and it cracks. Too slow and it will be soft. Bren curses the cast iron every day. Ethan stands nearby and waits. On the 5th try, Bren cools the rolls in a pit of hot ash. Slowly. 2 days. The rolls come out smooth and hard. Bren taps them with a hammer. The sound is clear, deep, like a bell. The old man is pleased. The rolling mill is a gateway to a new world. A red-hot strip of iron is passed between the rolls. The rolls squeeze it, stretch it, make it thinner and smoother than any blacksmith could achieve with a hammer in a week. Ethan runs the first strip through. The red iron enters between the rolls. It hisses, sparks fly. Out comes a thin strip as straight as a ruler. Doran takes the strip. He turns it over in his hands. He says he's never seen anything like it. He says it's straighter than his best work in 20 years, and 20 times faster. Ethan runs the next one through, and the next, and the next. By evening, there's a stack of iron strips on the workshop floor, each of uniform thickness and width. These strips can be used to make hoops for barrels, strips for wheel rims, hinges, staples, and rails. Ethan picks up one strip, 10 feet long, 3 inches wide, 1.5 inches thick. It's not a rail, it's a blank. But if he runs it through the profile rollers one more time, he can get a rail, T-shaped or mushroom-shaped, a real rail for a wheel to run on. Ethan lays the strip on the floor. He pulls a lead pencil out of his pocket, the only thing from his world that he hasn't given away or traded. He crouches down and writes on the strip with the pencil. A date, the place, his name, Greystone's first steel roll. This is the beginning. So-yeon calculates the mill's output. At the engine's current capacity, he can roll 200 pounds of iron a day. 200 pounds is 8 strips. 8 strips a day, 56 a week. That's enough to supply all of Haldvik with hardware, and to start building up a stockpile for rails. Railroad tracks are still a long way off. We need shaped rolls. We need better quality steel. We need ties. We need ballast. We need a lot of things. But the strip on the workshop floor is the first step. In October, Yuna's son arrives. The daughter of a traveling doctor, 24 years old, a second-generation Korean. Her mother was a refugee from the same island kingdom as So-yeon. Yuna doesn't come to see Ethan. She comes to see Bren. The old man is lying in bed with a burn. A cauldron in the foundry yard has sprung a leak. Hot water splashed onto his left arm. The burn extends from his wrist to his elbow. The skin is red and blistered. The local apothecary applied an ointment made of goose fat and herbs. It doesn't help. Bren lies there moaning. Yuna enters the house, a petite woman with dark hair and a calm expression. She removes the bandage. She looks at it. She says the ointment needs to be removed, that the fat is clogging the wound and preventing it from breathing. She washes the burn with clean water. She applies a compress of steamed herbs that she takes out of her own bag. She bandages it with a clean cloth. She tells Bren she'll come every day to change the bandage. Bren looks at her.
He says he didn't ask for a doctor. Una says she didn't ask either. 3 weeks later, the burn heals. No infection, no scars. Bren moves the fingers of his left hand. They all work. He looks at Una. He says nothing. He just nods. Una stays in Gracetown. Ethan learns about her through Margaret, the female doctor who cured Bren. She knows herbs. She knows how to stitch wounds. Ethan thinks for 3 days. Then he goes to Una and asks what people in the city die from most often. Una answers without hesitation. From infected wounds, from childbed fever, from dirty water. 3 causes. All 3 are connected to one thing. Dirt. Ethan nods. He knows. In his world, Ignaz Semmelweis proved in 1847 that doctors were killing women in childbirth with dirty hands. He was declared insane for it. Here, Ethan won't wait to be declared insane. He builds an autoclave. A copper cauldron with a bolted lid, with a safety valve, with a pressure gauge. You put bandages and instruments inside, you close it, you light a fire, the pressure rises. The temperature inside rises above 100 degrees. Everything that can rot and infect burns away. Sterile, clean, safe. Una stands in front of the autoclave and listens as Ethan explains. He talks about invisible creatures that live in the dirt and cause infection. He says that hot steam under pressure kills them. Una listens. She doesn't interrupt. She doesn't object. She doesn't ask how he knows. She accepts it. Because all her life she has seen people die from things they shouldn't die from. And if this strange craftsman says that hot steam can stop it, she will try. A month later, Una delivers her first baby using sterile instruments and bandages. The mother survives. The baby survives. 3 months later, she delivers her 10th baby. All the mothers are alive. All the children are alive. Last year, out of 10 births, 2 mothers died of fever. Una sits across from Ethan in the workshop after the 10th birth. She looks into his eyes. For a long time, silently. Then she says quietly that she is his until the end. Ethan doesn't answer. He doesn't know what to say. He's an engineer, not a hero. He just built a boiler with a lid. Una gets up and leaves. She turns around at the door. She says she doesn't need an answer. She just needs him to know. Ethan sits in the empty workshop. Watt's engine regulator spins on the test bench. The balls rise and fall. The machine breathes. He looks at it and thinks of the woman who just said words to him that he didn't deserve. Or maybe he did. He doesn't know. In November, news arrives. Brother Aldrich, Inquisitor of the Order of the Two Fires. He is coming to Greystone, in person. Brother Aldrich arrives on the first day of December. 3 men in gray robes on gray horses, Aldrich in the lead. He is 40, a gaunt face, intelligent eyes, clean hands, not the hands of an executioner, the hands of a scholar. He dismounts at the church. Father Cullum meets him at the threshold. They speak quietly. Ethan stands by the workshop 100 paces away and watches. Evelyn stands nearby. She is pale. She says she has seen Aldrich before. 10 years ago, he came to the capital. He shut down the workshop of the glassmaker who had made the lens for the telescope. The glassmaker was not burned, but the workshop was destroyed. The lens was smashed. The glassmaker drank himself to death 2 years later. Aldrich doesn't kill. He destroys. Quietly, carefully, by the book. That's worse. Aldrich comes to the car the next day. He stands in front of it in silence. 10 minutes. He looks. He listens. Then he turns to Ethan and says he wants to understand, not to judge, to understand. Ethan tenses up. This could be a trap. Or it could be the truth. Aldrich says he's read about something similar, that 80 years ago, here in Gracetown, there was a man who built something like this, that this man was convicted and burned, and that Aldrich was a boy back then and saw the execution, and that ever since he's been wondering if the sentence was fair. Ethan is silent. Aldrich knows about Thomas Raid. He knows more than Ethan. Aldrich asks how the machine works. Ethan explains, simply, no tricks. Fire heats the water. The water turns to steam. The steam creates pressure. The pressure moves the piston. The piston pumps water from the shaft. Aldrich listens. He nods. Then he asks a question Ethan didn't expect. He asks if the machine has a will of its own. Ethan answers that it doesn't, that the machine is just a collection of parts, copper and iron and wood, nothing more. Aldrich points to Watt's engine regulator standing on a stand in the workshop beyond the window. He says he sees a mechanism that controls itself, that speeds up and slows down without a human hand. He asks if that isn't will, then what is it? Ethan is silent. Aldrich has hit the mark, precisely and painfully. The regulator is feedback. The machine reacts to its own state and corrects it. That's not will. It's a mechanism. But explaining the difference to a person from the Middle Ages who doesn't know the word cybernetics is impossible. Evelyn steps forward. She speaks quietly. She speaks of St. Elvar's treatise, of fire that strives upward and water that strives downward, of the nature of things, of order. She says that the regulator does not exercise will. It follows a law. Just as a stone falls downward, not because it wants to, but because that is its nature. The balls diverge not because they decided to, but because they are pushed by rotation. A valve closes not because the machine thinks, but because the lever is pressed. A chain of cause and effect, not will, order. Aldrich listens to Evelyn. He looks at her intently. Then he says the argument is beautiful, and that he will remember it, but that it is not he who decides. The chapter of the order decides. And the chapter will demand more than a single quote from a forgotten treatise. Aldrich stays in Gracetown for a week. He walks around the town. He talks to people, with miners, with blacksmiths, with the miners' wives. He asks about the machine, about Ethan, about life before the machine and after. He listens. He takes notes. He doesn't intimidate. He doesn't threaten. He gathers information. And every evening he comes to Ethan and talks. These conversations are the hardest moments in Ethan's life since the transfer, because Aldrich asks questions to which Ethan has no answers. Aldrich asks what will happen to the 10,000 boatmen when the steam engine is installed on the ship. Ethan is silent. He knows what will happen. In his world, it has already happened. Thousands of people lost their jobs. Aldrich asks what will happen to the Water Carriers Guild. 120 years, thousands of families. Ethan is silent. He knows. The monopoly will die. People will be left without a crust of bread. Aldrich asks what will happen when the king mounts a steam engine on a gun carriage. Ethan is silent. He knows. Steam transport means mobile artillery, rapid troop deployment, industrial weapons production, a war on a scale this world has never seen. Aldrich doesn't shout. He doesn't accuse. He just asks, quietly, politely. And every question is like a knife. Because Ethan knows the answers, all the answers, and they're all bad. Ethan lies on the straw in Margaret's house at night and stares at the ceiling. Does he have the right? Does he have the right to shatter this world? To give it technology it isn't ready for? That will destroy as much as it creates? That will bring wars they've never heard of here? Margaret isn't sleeping. She's sitting by the stove, staring at the fire, speaking softly. She says that before Ethan's machine, her son lay underwater in a dark mine. And now, the mine is dry. And other mothers aren't burying their sons in wet tunnels. And that if this is wrong, she doesn't know what's right. Ethan is silent. Margaret is right. Aldrich is right too. Both are right. And that is the scariest thing. On the 7th day, Aldrich comes to the workshop at dawn. Ethan is already there, standing at the workbench, drawing. Aldrich says he's leaving, that he hasn't signed the sentence, but he hasn't dropped the charges either. That he'll report to the chapter, that the chapter will send a commission in 6 months, maybe later, maybe sooner. And that until then, Ethan must think about his questions. Ethan says he thinks about it every night. Aldrich nods. He says he knows. He says he can see it in his eyes. Then he says something strange. He says that man 80 years ago also thought at night, that he saw his diary before the execution, that the diary didn't contain drawings. There were questions. The same questions Aldrich is asking now. Thomas Ride asked them of himself, and found no answers, and burned to death. Aldrich leaves. Ethan stands on the porch and watches as the gray figures disappear behind the hill. Then he goes to the workshop. He gathers all 6 of them. Margaret, Rowan, Soyeon, Lisa, Evelyn, Yoon. He takes the canvas off the workbench. Underneath the canvas is a Watt engine. Small, polished to a shine, flawless. He starts it up. The regulator turns. The balls rise. The machine reaches a steady speed and maintains it on its own. Ethan says quietly that this means they can build machines that regulate themselves. Looms, pumps for every mine in the kingdom, and steam locomotives. Margaret asks why they need steam locomotives. Ethan looks at her, at all 6 of them, at the light from the window falling on the copper balls, spinning as steadily as a heart. He says that when they come for them for real, they'll have time to leave altogether, or to face them altogether. And he asks what they'll choose. Silence. Margaret looks at him. Rowena looks at him. Soyeon looks at him. Lisa looks at him. Evelyn looks at him. Yuna looks at him. 6 women, 1 car. And outside the window, the world's first factory chimney is belching smoke. Rowena speaks first. She says to meet them. Brother Aldrich spent a week in Greystone, asking Ethan painful questions about the consequences of technological progress. Evelyn defended the machines with a theological argument, but Aldrich warned of the coming by the chapter. Ethan showed the team Watt's engine and asked about the choice between flight and fight. Rowena chose to fight. Winter of the 2nd year, the feast of the holy fire, the longest night of the year. By tradition, a candle burns in every window in Greystone in memory of those who have passed away. Margaret has few candles. She lights one for her husband. A week before the holiday, Ethan begins work on a project he tells no one about. He comes to the workshop after dinner and stays until dawn. Lisa notices. She asks what he's doing. Ethan says it's a gift. Lisa doesn't ask for whom. She already knows. Ethan is drawing out copper tubes, thin ones, the diameter of a pinky finger. He soldered the joints, 28 tubes, 1 for every house where a widow or an orphan lived. The main line ran from the workshop down the street. There's a gas generator at the workshop, a very simple one, an iron box into which coal is loaded. The box heats up. Without air, the coal releases gas, coal gas, flammable. The gas flows through the tube. At the end of the tube in every window is a small copper horn with a hole. You light it. It burns, a steady blue flame. It doesn't go out in the wind. It burns until morning. On the night of the holiday, Ethan walks down the street, a burning wick in his hand. He approaches the first window. He lights the horn.
A blue flame flares up behind the glass. The second house. The third. The fourth. 28 little flames. 28 blue stars and windows that used to be dark. People come out onto the street. They stand and watch, silently. An old woman at the third house is crying. She hasn't lit a candle in 3 years because candles cost money, and she has none. Now a light is burning in her window, for her husband, for her brother. Margaret steps out onto the porch. She sees a light in her window, and a second one, separate on the kitchen windowsill, the one Ethan put there for her son. She stands, doesn't move, then slowly descends the steps, approaches Ethan, takes his hand, his right one, scorched by the burner, holds it. She says nothing. She just holds it. After this night, the town is finally behind Ethan, not because he built the pump,
Not because he provided jobs and silver, but because he remembered the dead. Because on the darkest night of the year, he gave light to those who couldn't afford it. This isn't engineering. It's something else. Something Ethan himself doesn't know the name of. January, the 3rd year since the relocation. Ethan begins what he built the rolling mill and the lathe and the Watt engine for. A locomotive. Small, 6 tons, speed 15 miles per hour, 4 wheels on 2 axles, a horizontal boiler with smoke tubes, 2 cylinders, a tender with coal and water. He calls it Margaret 1. He doesn't ask for permission. He just paints it on the side of the boiler in white paint. Margaret 1. Margaret finds out about it when she comes into the workshop with lunch. She sees her name on the side of the iron machine. She sets the pot of porridge on the workbench. She stands there. She looks. Then she turns and leaves. Ethan thinks he's hurt her feelings. In the evening, she sets dinner in front of him, not porridge, meat with bread and baked apples. Ethan looks at her. Margaret doesn't look at him. She says that if he named the machine after her, then at least he should eat properly. It's not an admission, not an explanation. That's Margaret. She speaks the language of food and warmth, the language of a stove that doesn't smoke, and a dinner that isn't porridge. Building the locomotive takes 4 months: February, March, April, May. Bren casts the cylinders, 2 of them. Each is turned on a lathe until it's mirror smooth. Lisa grinds the piston rings, bronze, the first of their kind in the world. 3 rings on each piston. The clearance is minimal. Almost no steam escapes. Doran forges the frame. Cale makes the axles. Bren casts the wheels, cast iron, with a flange. Ethan explains why the flange is needed. A protrusion on the inner side of the wheel that prevents it from coming off the rail. Bren understands immediately. A simple idea, brilliant in its simplicity. So-Yun keeps track of every detail: weight, size, material, cost. By May, she knows the exact cost of the locomotive down to the last rivet. Rowena comes by every week. She looks at the growing machine. She calculates on an abacus. She calculates expenses and future income. She calculates how much cargo can be transported, how much time can be saved, how many horses can be replaced. Evelyn translates Ethan's technical explanations into language people can understand. She writes, a little book for the school children. The ABCs of machines, what steam is, what pressure is, what a lever is, in simple words, with pictures drawn by Lisa. Una is getting ready. She knows that anything could happen when the locomotive is first started. The boiler might leak, it might explode, it might scald people. She prepares bandages and ointments. She sets up an autoclave in the workshop. She sterilizes the instruments. She waits. The rails, 200 yards. From the foundry yard to the dock on the creek. Ethan lays them himself, with the help of Doran and Kyle and 10 miners. Wooden ties made of stained teak, Steel rails rolled on a mill, mushroom-shaped profile. Ethan turned the profile rolls on a lathe over 2 months, the most difficult work of his life. Each roll weighs 100 pounds. Each must be absolutely symmetrical. Lisa helped. He couldn't have done it without her. Her eye is more precise than any tool they have. The first day of June in the 3rd year. Margaret 1 stands on the rails. Black, heavy, stocky. Not beautiful. Not a single superfluous line.
Everything is functional. The boiler, the pipe. 2 cylinders on either side, a tender with coal and a water barrel. Ethan stands nearby, checking every joint for the 10th time. His hands are covered in soot up to his elbows. Bren stands on the other side. Lisa is sitting on the tender, checking the draft. Doran and Cale are standing by the switch. Margaret is standing by the foundry yard, watching. Rowena arrived on horseback at dawn. She's standing next to Margaret. So-Yun is sitting on a box with a notebook and a brush. Evelyn is standing a short distance away from Ethan, wearing glasses. Yuna is standing by the workshop with a tool bag and a stack of sterile bandages. Ethan is stoking the fire in the furnace. The coal catches fire. Smoke comes out of the chimney. The water in the boiler heats up. Ethan watches the pressure gauge. The pressure rises. Slowly. 10 minutes. 20. 30. The pressure reaches operating level. Ethan stands by the reverse lever, his hand on the regulator handle. He takes a breath. Opens the regulator. Steam flows into the cylinders. The pistons fire. The wheels turn. Margaret 1 jerks. A screech. Metal on metal. The wheels slip along the rails. 1 revolution. 2. 3. The locomotive starts moving, slowly, heavily, with a creak and a clang. But it's moving. Ethan walks alongside it. The machine picks up speed, 5 miles per hour. Ethan breaks into a brisk walk. 7. He runs. 10. He can't keep up. He jumps onto the running board. Margaret 1 rolls along the tracks. 200 yards. 200 yards that will change this world forever. The roar is so loud that birds take flight from trees half a mile away. Smoke pours from the stack in a black column. Steam whistles from the safety valve. Margaret 1 reaches the station. Ethan closes the throttle. It slows down. The brake shoes clamp onto the wheels. The locomotive comes to a stop. Silence. Ethan stands on the running board. He looks back. 200 yards of track. The whole crew is standing by the foundry yard, small figures against the backdrop of stone walls. Ethan jumps down to the ground. His legs give way. He sits down on the rail. He looks at the locomotive, at his machine. The first steam locomotive in this world. Tears stream down his cheeks. He doesn't wipe them away. There's no one to be ashamed of. He is alone on the platform. And his machine. 5 minutes later, Lisa runs up. She ran the whole 200 yards, flushed, out of breath. Her braid is tousled. Her eyes are huge. She stands in front of the locomotive, looks up at it, then turns to Ethan and asks if she can take it for a ride. Ethan laughs. For the first time in 3 years. A real laugh. From the gut. He says of course she can. But first they have to turn it around, because Margaret 1 went the wrong way on its first run. Ethan mixed up the reverse position. The switch was set backward. The locomotive went in reverse. 200 yards. The whole solemn scene played out in reverse. Lisa is cackling. Ethan is cackling. They're sitting on the tracks, cackling like madmen. Bren comes over. He looks at them. He shakes his head. He says he now knows for sure that his granddaughter is in good hands, because only a fool can laugh at his own mistake, and a clever fool is the best craftsman. After the first test run, the real work begins. The track needs to be extended. 200 yards is just a demonstration. We need miles, dozens of miles.
The first stage, from Greystone to Carnholm, 80 miles. Carnholm is a port on the river.
From there, silver and copper are shipped by water to the capital. Right now, the journey from Greystone to Carnholm takes 6 days by wagon on a dirt road. A locomotive will make the trip in 6 hours. Rowena does the math. Jan does the math. Construction costs, cost of rails, cost of ties, cost of the embankment, cost of bridges over streams and ravines. The figures are enormous. But the savings on transportation are even greater. Payback period? 2 years. Rowena signs the decree authorizing the construction of the road. As Baroness of Haldvik, at her own expense, with money from the mines. In July, a letter arrives from the king. Not a threat, a proposal. King Erwin wants to see Ethan in the capital. He wants to talk. He wants to see the machines. He sends an envoy, an elderly man in rich robes, polite, quiet, intelligent. He says the king understands faster than anyone else, that whoever has a steam engine in 10 years will have an army, and that the king wants to be that man. Ethan listens. He tells the ambassador he won't go to the capital, that he needs guarantees, that the machines will stay in Gracetown, that the workshop will remain under the Baroness's protection, that the Order of the Two Fires won't be granted permission to arrest him. The ambassador listens, nods, leaves. 2 weeks later, he brings a charter bearing the royal seal, a guarantee of the workshop's inviolability in Gracetown, a guarantee of protection from the Inquisition in exchange for the Crown's exclusive right to the military use of steam engines. Ethan reads the charter. Soyeon reads it. Rowena reads it. Evelyn reads the legal section written in ancient ecclesiastical Latin. 4 women and 1 man pore over the document until nightfall. They find 3 loopholes. They correct them. They send it back. A month later, the final version arrives, clean, no loopholes. Ethan signs it. Rowena signs. Greystone is now under royal protection. But this protection will have to be paid for, with machines for the army. Ethan knows what that means. Aldrich was right. A steam engine on a gun carriage, rapid troop deployment, a new kind of war. He signed knowing this, because the alternative is worse. The alternative is the Order of the Two Fires with torches outside the workshop. The alternative is the stake for him and prison for Rowena. The alternative is dark windows on the Feast of the Holy Fire. He made his choice, just as Thomas Ride did 80 years ago. Only Ride lost. But Ethan is still alive. Road construction begins in August. 200 workers, miners, farmers, laborers from neighboring villages. Rowena pays in silver. Good wages, better than in the mines. People come. The work is hard. An embankment. Ethan calculates the profile. A gradient of no more than 1 in 100. A curve radius of no less than 300 yards. Drainage ditches on both sides. A stone foundation. Gravel. Sand. Sleepers. Rails. Every day, 200 men move the track 300 yards forward. 300 yards. A mile in 8. 80 miles in 2 years. A long time. Too long, Ethan thinks. He needs a second rolling mill. He needs more rails. He needs a 3rd locomotive to haul materials. He needs it all at once, and he has nothing but people and time. In September, something happens that he didn't expect. A strike. The first in the history of this world. The construction workers stop. Not all of them. 30 men from the southern section. Their foreman is red-haired Torin, the very same one from the Margaret mine. Torin comes to Ethan. He says the men are tired, that they work from dawn till dusk, that the food is poor, that they sleep in tents on the bare ground, that they were promised silver but are paid in copper, that copper is worth half as much. Ethan listens. Torin is right. Soyeon confirms it. Rowena switched to copper coins because the silver is needed to buy iron for the rails. The workers receive the same amount but in a less valuable metal. Formally, the contract hasn't been broken. In reality, the workers have been cheated. Ethan goes to Rowena. He says they need to pay in silver as promised. Rowena says, "There's no silver. It all went toward the iron." Ethan says that if they don't pay in silver, tomorrow it won't be 30 people on strike, but 200, and construction will grind to a halt for months. Rowena thinks. So Jan calculates. She finds a solution. Don't pay with silver. Pay with copper, but at market rates, not face value. Compensate for the difference with food, meat, bread, beer. The workers receive the same amount of copper, but in addition, they get a hot meal 3 times a day and a place in a barracks with a stove instead of a tent. Ethan goes to Torin.
Explains. Torin listens. Thinks. Then says that the workers want 1 day off every 10 days. Ethan agrees. Torin returns to the crew. An hour later, work resumes. The first labor dispute. The first industrial agreement. Soyan writes down the terms on paper. Both sides sign. A document. A contract. Something that had never existed in this world before. In October, an assassination attempt. Night. Ethan is sleeping in the workshop. He fell asleep over his blueprints. The door creaks. He wakes up. A shadow in the doorway. A man in a dark coat with a knife. Ethan manages to roll off the workbench onto the floor. The knife strikes the wood where his head had been just a second ago. Ethan screams. The man lunges at him. A second strike. Ethan blocks it with his arm. The blade cuts his forearm. Blood. Pain. Ethan grabs the first thing within reach, an iron blank. He throws it. He misses. The man swings again. And at that moment, Lisa appears in the doorway. She's 16. She came to the workshop for a tool she'd forgotten. She's holding a blacksmith's hammer. She doesn't think. She doesn't scream. She strikes. The hammer hits the mercenary in the shoulder. He drops the knife.
Lisa strikes again, in the knee. The mercenary falls. Lisa stands over him, hammer in hand. She's breathing heavily. Her eyes are huge. Her hands aren't shaking. Ethan gets up. Blood is running down his arm. Una runs in 5 minutes later. She stitches the wound. 7 stitches, with a clean needle from the autoclave. The bandage is sterile. The mercenary lies on the floor, bound, unconscious. In the morning, Rowena interrogates him personally. He says little, but enough. Sent by the Water Bearers Guild, not the Central Council, the local branch in Kernholm. Someone decided it was cheaper to kill one man than to lose a monopoly. Rowena sends the mercenary to the capital, with a cover letter addressed to the king. The royal charter protects Greystone. An attempt on a person under royal protection is a crime against the crown. The Water Bearers Guild takes the first blow. Not from Ethan, from the law. Printing begins in November. Ethan's apprentice, a boy named Dan, 14 years old. He came to the school 2 years ago. Not the smartest, not the most agile, but the most persistent. He assembles the printing press according to Ethan's blueprints. A wooden frame, lead type that Brenna casts from carved from wood. Colorful leather rollers. A screw press. The simplest printing press. Gutenberg would have recognized it. The first newspaper. 1 sheet, 2 sides. The Greystone Herald. News, classifieds, silver and copper prices, mine schedules, and a short article by Evelyn on how a steam pump works. In simple terms, for everyone. Dunn prints 50 copies, delivers them door to door. People read. Those who can. The rest are read aloud. In the tavern, by the well, in the square. Word about Greystone spreads, not by rumor, by the printed word. Spring of the 4th year. The road has reached Kernholm. Not in 2 years, as Ethan had calculated. In a year and a half. Because after the assassination attempt, the king sent 100 soldiers to help with the construction. Not out of generosity, out of calculation. The crown needs the road. Cargo, taxes, speed, military advantage. The king calculates better than Rowena with her calculating machine. The tracks run from Greystone to Kernholm. 80 miles, 3 bridges, 2 tunnels, 4 stations. At each station, a water tower for refueling the locomotives. Steam pumps pump water into the towers. Machines serving machines. A system, not separate devices, but a system. The line's opening is scheduled for May 1st. Rowena invites the king's ambassador. She invites representatives from neighboring baronies. She invites merchants from Kernholm. She does not invite the Order of the Two Fires. She does not invite the Water Carriers Guild. They already know. Ethan is preparing 2 trains. Margaret 1 pulls a passenger car. Wooden, open air, benches for 30 people. Margaret 2 pulls a freight car, a flatbed with sides, capable of carrying 10 tons. Margaret 2 was built by Lisa, almost without Ethan's help. She is 17. She is the best foundry worker and lathe operator in Greystone after Brenna, or maybe even better than Brenna. She doesn't say so. Brenna knows, and is proud. The first day of May, morning, fog. The rails glisten with dew. Margaret 1 stands by the platform, clean, polished. The horn is decorated with a ribbon. Ethan doesn't know whose idea it was. He suspects Lisa. Everyone is standing on the platform. Margaret, Rowena, Soyan, Lisa, Evelyn, Una, Brenna, Doran, Cale, Torin, Dan. 20 students from the school. The king's ambassador. 3 barons from neighboring provinces. 10 merchants. Father Column. He came on his own. No one called him. He stands off to the side, silent. Ethan climbs into the cab. Lisa stands nearby. She will be the stoker. Ethan nods to her. She opens the furnace door. The coals are red. The pressure on the gauge is normal. Ethan grabs a lever. This time he checked the valve 3 times. Forward, not backward. He opens the regulator. Steam flows into the cylinders. Margaret 1 starts moving, smoothly, without a jolt. It picks up speed. 5 miles per hour. 10. 15. The platform is moving. People are sitting on benches and clinging to the sides. The wind blows in their faces. Trees rush by, fields, hills, bridges, streams. 80 miles, a 6-hour journey, with stops at stations to refill with water. Crowds at every station. People from the villages have come to watch. They stand along the embankment, silently, watching the iron machine that roars and smokes and pulls a car full of people faster than any horse. By noon, the train approaches Kernholm, a town on the river. 3,000 residents, docks, warehouses, shopping arcades. People have poured onto the shore. They watch. Margaret 1 stops at the terminal platform. Ethan steps down. Feet on solid ground. 80 miles, 6 hours, a distance that used to take 6 days. The king's ambassador follows him down. He stands on the platform. He looks at the locomotive. Then he turns to Ethan. He says quietly that the king wants the same kind of railway from Kernholm to the capital. 220 miles. Ethan says he'll build it, but he needs workers, materials, money, and time. A lot of time. The ambassador nods. He says the king will provide everything, because now he sees what Ethan saw 3 years ago. The future, the return journey. Margaret 1 heads back to Greystone. Evening, sunset, a red sun over the hills of Haldvik. Ethan stands in the cab. Lisa shovels coal. The locomotive runs smoothly. The rails hum. Fields sown with wheat rush by the window. The drought ended last year. The rains have returned. The rivers have filled. The water wheels are running again. But the steam pumps haven't stopped. They work faster, more reliably, in any weather. The world has changed. It won't go back. Ethan watches the sunset. He thinks of Thomas Reid, of the man who stood here 80 years ago, who saw this same sky, who dreamed the same dreams, and who was burned. Ethan takes a chisel pencil, the last thing from his past life. He twirls it between his fingers, then puts it back. Someday he'll put it in a museum, when there's a museum in Gracetown. And there will be. Margaret I arrives in Gracetown at night. Torches are burning on the platform. The whole town is waiting. Margaret stands on the porch of the house. Ethan steps down from the cab. He walks toward her. Dirty, tired, happy. Margaret looks at him. Then she says dinner has gone cold. Ethan says it's fine. Margaret says she'll heat it up, and that if he ever calls her name again, she'll hit him with a frying pan. Ethan smiles. Margaret almost smiles. Almost. Autumn of the 4th year. War comes not as expected. Not an army, not a crusade by the order of the two fires, not the guild's mercenaries. The neighboring kingdom of Myrdan, beyond the mountains to the east. Their spies have been watching Greystone for 2 years, watching the machines, the road. The king of Myrdan realized the same thing King Erwin had, that whoever possesses a steam engine possesses an army.
And he decided it was better to destroy Greystone now than to fight steam locomotives 10 years from now. 3,000 Myrdan cavalry crossed the mountain pass in September. They moved fast, at night, without supply trains, light cavalry. One goal: Greystone, the workshop, the foundry, and Ethan Cross. Torin is the first to find out. His brigade on the far stretch of the road spots the horsemen. Torin rides to the nearest station. There's a telegraph at the station. No, there's no telegraph. Ethan didn't have time to build it. There's a signal mast at the station. Flags. Colored flags by day, lanterns by night. A system Ethan set up at every station. The simplest semaphore communication. Torin raises a red flag. The next station sees it. It raises its own. An hour later, red flags are flying at every station from the far section to Gracetown. Ethan sees the red flag from the workshop porch. Red means danger. He doesn't know what kind, but he acts. He calls a meeting in 10 minutes. Margaret, Rowena, Soyan, Lisa, Evelyn, Una, Bren, Doran. Torin reaches Greystone by evening. He's ridden his horse hard. He tells them, 3,000 horsemen, Myrdan colors, heading this way. 2 days' journey. Rowena turns pale. 3,000 horsemen. Greystone has no army. There are 300 miners with pickaxes. There are 200 road builders. There are walls. Stone walls. But not fortress walls. Ethan thinks. Soyan calculates. Time. Distance. Cavalry speed. 2 days. Maybe 3 if the road is bad. Ethan asks Rowena where the nearest royal garrison is. Rowena says it's in Kernholm, 500 soldiers. But it's a 6-day ride from Kernholm to Greystone. No, not 6 days, 6 hours. The railroad. Ethan stands up. He says he needs Margaret I. He needs Margaret II. He needs all the coal there is, and he needs Rowena to write an order to the garrison commander in Kernholm in the name of the Baroness and in the name of the Royal Charter, to send troops, immediately. Margaret, too, leaves for Kernholm in 2 hours. Lisa is driving. She is 17 years old, and she is the only person besides Ethan who knows how to operate a locomotive. Ethan stays behind. He has work to do. Night. Ethan works. He doesn't sleep. Bren doesn't sleep. Doran doesn't sleep. They are making weapons. No, not weapons. They're building a machine. Ethan takes Watt's third engine, the one that was on the rolling mill. He removes it, places it on a platform. He attaches a winch to the engine shaft, a cable to the winch.
He hooks a cart loaded with a stone to the cable. A catapult. No, not a catapult. A steam winch that can hurl a 200-pound stone 300 yards. Rough, inaccurate, but 3,000 horsemen in an open field is a target that's hard to miss. Margaret stands nearby. She hands him tools, silently, just like in the early days, when he was building the first pump. She doesn't ask why. She knows. Una is preparing the infirmary. The autoclave runs non-stop. Bandages, ointments, suture thread. She knows what's coming. So Yun is counting food and water supplies in case of a siege. Evelyn is writing, not a newspaper, a letter, to the chapter of the Order of the Two Fires. She writes that Greystone is under attack by Murden, that Murden is Erwin's enemy, that the destruction of Greystone will weaken the kingdom, that the Order must decide whose side it is on. She sends it south with a messenger. Rowena stands on the wall and looks east, toward the mountains from which the horsemen will come. She is calm. She made her decision back in the workshop when Ethan asked whether to meet them or leave. She chose to meet them. Dawn of the second day. Lisa has returned from Kernholm. Margaret, too, stands by the platform. On the platform are 400 armed soldiers. 6 hours. 400 men in 6 hours. A journey that would take 6 days on horseback. The garrison commander jumps down onto the platform. He looks at Ethan. He says he never in his life thought he'd travel 80 miles in a single morning. Ethan says you get used to it. 400 soldiers, 300 miners, 200 builders, the city walls, a steam winch, and 2 miles of track outside the city along which Margaret I can travel back and forth, carrying people and stones faster than any horse. The Murdan horsemen appear around noon. 3,000 of them, on foaming horses. They rode fast, they were charging. They were counting on the element of surprise. They were counting on a defenseless little town. They didn't count on walls with soldiers. They didn't count on a machine that hurls stones. They didn't count on a railroad that brought the army here in 6 hours. The Murden commander stops the cavalry half a mile from the walls. He looks. He assesses. The walls, people, a machine, smoke from the pipes, the roar of the engine, the whistle of steam. Ethan stands by the winch, his hand on the lever. The boiler pressure is up. A 200-pound stone lies in the cart, ready to be launched. He is not a warrior. He is an engineer. But his machines are his weapons. The Murden commander stands. An hour. 2. Then he turns his horses around. 3,000 horsemen ride east, slowly, without looking back. They will return, maybe in a year, maybe in 5. But next time, the road will be longer. The army will be closer. The machines will be more powerful. And they know it. Evening. Ethan sits on the porch of the workshop. His hands are shaking. For the first time in 4 years, not from the cold, from the tension finally easing. Margaret sits down beside him, silently. Rowena stands by the wall and looks east. So-Yun sits with a book and counts the losses. There are no losses. Not a single person, not a single shot, not a single stone. A war that never began. Because the machine turned out to be faster than the horse. Lisa climbs down from the Margaret II cab. Dirty, tired, hands covered in soot. She sits on the rail, closes her eyes, falls asleep sitting up. Brenna approaches, takes off her jacket, covers her granddaughter, steps back, stands and looks at her, at the 17-year-old girl who today drove a train 80 miles in the dark, who brought the army, who saved the city. Brenna crosses herself, not out of fear, out of pride. Evelyn approaches Ethan, says she received a reply from the chapter. The Order of the Two Fires will not send a commission. Not now. The Murden threat has changed the situation. Greystone is needed by the kingdom. The machines are needed. Ethan is needed. The church will not fight those who defend the crown. Not yet. Una sits in the infirmary, empty, clean, sterile. No bandages were needed. She puts them back in the autoclave, slowly, carefully. Then she sits down and cries, quietly. For the first time in front of Ethan, he comes over, asks why. Una says it's because no one died, that she's spent her whole life treating people after something bad happened, and that today is the first day when nothing bad happened, because the car was faster.
Ethan sits down next to her. He's silent. Una rests her head on his shoulder. He doesn't pull away. Night. Ethan steps out into the yard. Stars. Those very ones. 3 stars in a triangle. Bright. Motionless. He looks at them. He thinks of Thomas Ride, of his diary, of the phrase, "I was chosen." And you, whoever is reading this, were chosen too. Someone selects engineers and drops them into this world. Why? Ethan doesn't know. Not yet. But he knows one thing. Ride didn't die in vain. His copper became the pipes of the first pump. His blueprints inspired Ethan. His death served as a warning. And his dream of a railroad came true. 80 years later, by other hands. But it came true. Ethan turns toward the workshop. Through the window, he can see Watt's regulator on the stand. The balls are spinning. Slowly. Smoothly. Like a heart. The machine is running. It doesn't stop. Just as a machine built correctly should run. Margaret stands in the doorway of the house. She says dinner is on the table. Rowena stands by the gate. She's talking to the garrison commander about tomorrow. So-Yun sits at the table. She's writing, she's counting, planning. Lisa is sleeping on the railing under her grandfather's jacket. Evelyn is reading by the light of a gas lamp in the window. Una is folding bandages. 6. 6 women. 1 city. 1 road. 1 workshop. 1 pipe smoking into the night sky. Ethan walks into the house. He sits down at the table. Margaret places a plate in front of him. Meat, bread, baked apples. He eats. Then he leans back in his chair. Margaret sits across from him. She looks at him. She says that tomorrow they need to fix the fence around the chicken coop. A chicken has escaped. Ethan laughs. He says he'll fix it. Margaret nods. She stands up. As she walks past, she puts her hand on his shoulder. For a second. Then she takes it away and goes to the stove. To her stove, which isn't smoking. Which he built for her because the old ones smoked. Not because it's an invention. Because she should be warm. Ethan sits at the table in a warm house in a town that's alive. 28 blue lights are burning outside the window. Dark mountains on the horizon. Beyond the mountains, enemies who will return. Under the floor of the workshop are the blueprints for the next locomotive. At the school, 30 students who calculate pressure better than the local doctors calculate a pulse. Margaret 1 stands on the tracks with a ribbon on its smokestack. The town hall basement is empty. Thomas Ride's cylinder was melted down long ago, but his name is engraved on a plaque at the entrance to the foundry yard, next to Ethan's name, next to Brenna's name, next to Lisa's name. The names of the people who built the machines. Ethan closes his eyes. Tomorrow he needs to fix the fence and start designing a new engine and write a plan for Roven for the second section of the road to the capital and show Lisa how to calculate the boiler's strength for double the pressure and check on the students and ask So-Yun to calculate the budget for the next quarter and fix Evelyn's glasses because she dropped them in the crucible again, and help Una assemble the second autoclave for the hospital in Kernholm. A lot of work. A whole lot. It's good that he has a team. It's good that he's not alone.
Outside the window, above Greystone, 3 stars are shining in a triangle, bright and still. Someone is dropping engineers into this world. Ethan doesn't know why yet,
But he knows why he's here. To build. Not machines in general, machines for people. For Margaret, who now has a warm stove. For Rowena, who is now debt-free. For Soyun, who now has a name in the formula. For Lisa, who now has a workshop. For Evelyn, who now has glasses. For Yuna, who now has an autoclave. For the city, which now has a heart. Copper, steel, alive.